Developing right now on Morning News Now, crisis in the Caribbean this morning. A path of destruction across Puerto Rico as Hurricane Ernesto gains strength, threatening more torrential rain, intense winds, and heavy flooding. Now Bermuda bracing for impact. We're tracking the conditions, the dangers, and what to expect here at home. Also developing a high-stakes summit in the Middle East this morning. U.S. officials arriving in Qatar for a new round of ceasefire negotiations over the war in Gaza. Plus, Columbia University's president stepping down after months of criticism over campus protests. We'll bring you the latest. And the race for the White House heating up as the focus turns toward the economy.
Soon we are going to fix every single problem Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have created, and we are going to save our country.
Plus, the stage is set for the first vice presidential debate. And star power, the new research into how much our favorite celebrities really influence how we vote. Finally, this morning, promising new data showing signs of progress when it comes to teens and mental health. But why experts say more work is ahead. Important conversation we will have with a doctor who was involved in that study this morning.
Very important. And as long as we're having that conversation, we are making progress. Good to have you with us on this Thursday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to get started today with a close watch on the Atlantic Ocean, where Hurricane Ernesto is gaining strength. Hundreds of thousands are waking up without power and water in Puerto Rico after the then tropical storm dropped up to 10 inches of rain on some parts of the island yesterday. Dozens of flights were canceled, and devastating floods prompted President Biden to declare a state of emergency.
The Category 1 storm is now taking aim at Bermuda, packing winds more than 85 miles an hour. Forecasters predict it will become a Category 3 hurricane before it makes landfall on the island nation on Saturday. We have a team tracking Ernesto's path, starting with NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas on the ground in Bermuda.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. The National Hurricane Center has issued a hurricane warning for Bermuda, with local officials holding a press conference yesterday, warning residents here about the necessary preparations before a hurricane. Now, we spoke to some of the immigration officers as we arrived. Some of the residents last night who say they are used to hurricanes. They know what preparations need to be made, but of course, officials want to make sure that they are making those preparations, of course. Meanwhile, in Puerto Rico, the damage is still being assessed. There are still hundreds of thousands without power. At its peak, the number was more than 700,000 customers without power in Puerto Rico. That number has been reduced overnight. The last number reported was about 500,000 customers. This would mean that maybe a million people, because you're talking about customers, you have 2 to 3 people per household. That could be more than a million people without power in Puerto Rico. So the power company is expected to use helicopters today to inspect some of the lines in the areas most affected. The National Guard announced that they will be helping the power company with more helicopters, as they announced yesterday. The big issue in Puerto Rico is that the power lines need to be inspected before they can have power in many of these areas. Meanwhile, hundreds are still in shelters across the island, with the flooding affecting different municipalities. And Puerto Rico, again, still assessing the damage. There's also extra help coming after President Biden approved an emergency declaration, which would be of a lot of help, especially for the local communities on the east part of the island where the storm hit the hardest. Back to you, Joe, Savannah.
All right, Guad, thank you so much.
For more on the path of Hurricane Ernesto, let's take you now to your Morning News Now weather.
Chief Meteorologist Ryan Hanrahan from our NBC affiliate in Connecticut joins us now with that. Ryan, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we've got Hurricane Ernesto. It's north of Puerto Rico now, so the weather on the island is looking much, much better today. And Ernesto is strengthening right now. There was a little bit of dry air that got sort of wrapped into the storm circulation over the last 24 hours, but it looks like the thunderstorms are sort of wrapping around the center a little more than what we saw yesterday. So that's certainly a sign of strengthening. The storm is still 635 miles to the south-southwest of Bermuda, winds of 85 miles per hour. And if you look at this map, the orange here, these are tropical storm force winds, and the red would be winds at or above hurricane force. And watch what happens as the storm goes over the Atlantic. There's Bermuda, and it looks like Bermuda is going to get very close to a direct hit from this storm. We've got a hurricane warning in effect, destructive winds, flash flooding possible on the island. Bermuda, obviously, on the Atlantic Ocean, is fairly used to getting strong hurricanes, but this one looks like it's going to be a powerful one for the island. It arrives Friday night and early Saturday morning. The last hurricane to make landfall in Bermuda was Hurricane Paulette back in September of 2020. So it's been about 4 years. The storm comes to the north, and it looks like it stays pretty far to the east of the eastern seaboard here in the U.S. However, even though it's going to be offshore, about 600 miles or so offshore, it's going to send some very powerful waves towards the East Coast. So from the Atlantic Ocean beaches, from Maine down toward Cape Cod, the Jersey Shore, the Outer Banks, expect some large waves, some rough surf, and some rip currents this weekend. So if you've got plans to go to the beach, something to keep in mind there. Got some storms across the Midwest this morning, from Minneapolis down towards Chicago. Sort of an unsettled morning, some thunder and lightning heading into Chicago shortly. And we also have a risk for some severe weather today. No severe weather out there right now, but I do think we'll see some stronger storms developing by this afternoon. We've got temperatures that'll be in the 80s across the Midwest, with that chance for some showers and some thunderstorms. 21 million at risk for severe weather today. That threat will shift to the east tomorrow. So Detroit, Indianapolis, down toward Nashville, a marginal risk for some severe thunderstorms. And we also have some heavy rain that'll be moving through as well. The heat continues down south. In fact, it's a little worse today than it's been over the last couple of days. A heat warning in effect now from Tulsa to Little Rock down through Jackson, Mississippi, and New Orleans. Temperatures about 5 to 10 degrees above average. Little Rock 99 today, 101 in Dallas, 96 in New Orleans. Still hot tomorrow. Temperatures around 100 degrees in Dallas once again. Same in Little Rock. And a little cooler up to the north, though getting a bit warmer. St. Louis in the 80s over the weekend. Same in Cincinnati and D.C.
Hard to believe it's getting hotter in the south with this bad.
It is hard to believe. Absolutely.
Oh, it really is, but it's been lovely here.
It certainly has been.
Ryan,
yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
There's breaking news out of the Middle East. The Gaza Health Ministry says that Israel's military offensive has now killed more than 40,000 Palestinians in the enclave since the war started 10 months ago. The news comes as a new round of ceasefire negotiations is set to begin today in Qatar, with Hamas saying that it will not be taking part. For more, let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez. He's in Tel Aviv with the latest. Raf, good morning. So when it comes to these talks, where do things stand?
Joe, good morning. Israel's negotiators departed earlier today for Qatar. They will be meeting with the mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. And CIA Director Bill Burns is once again in the room, as he has been through these many, many rounds of negotiations over the last 10 months, hoping to make progress. But as you said, Joe, Hamas is not going to be at these talks, and the White House has really been trying to set expectations here. No one expects that the CIA director is going to emerge from a hotel room in Doha with a piece of paper to end this war in Gaza, to finally bring the hostages home. But the hope from the Biden administration is to make significant progress, to give the mediators something that they can go over to Hamas with and finally get this deal over the line. It has been made more complicated, according to both U.S. and foreign officials, by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continuing to add new demands in between these rounds of negotiations. But you also now have Hamas led by Yahya Sinwar, the hardline leader who masterminded October 7th. And their position with these talks has been, there's nothing more to negotiate. Our position is clear, and it's up to Israel to agree to it.
Raf, at this point, is there at least like a basic framework for an agreement to work off of?
So we've been through a couple of iterations here, Joe. You'll remember President Biden stood up at the White House back in May, and he said that there was a three-phase deal, the basic framework of which had been agreed. It would involve the release of a certain amount of hostages in return for a 7-week ceasefire in the first phase, and then end of the war, release of all hostages in the second, and then phase 3 would be about the reconstruction of Gaza and potentially a path towards a Palestinian state. The devil is absolutely in the detail, Joe. I'll give you just one example. The two sides appear deadlocked on this question of what is going to happen on the border between Gaza and Egypt. You might remember Israeli forces seized that border back back in early May. Israel says its troops need to remain there to prevent Hamas from smuggling weapons under the border back into Gaza. Hamas is saying for them that is a non-starter. Those troops need to go. So it is that kind of more technical detail, if you will, that is really, really holding up these talks, and it is not clear if the two sides are going to be able to bridge those gaps.
Jeff. Raf, it has been now more than 2 weeks since the killing of those top Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. We've been bracing, especially this week, for the possibility of retaliation. Any more clues as to when that could happen?
Joe, I can tell you, people in this city, people across Israel, have gone to bed every night for the last 2 weeks looking at the sky, wondering, is tonight the night that those missiles, those drones expected from Iran are going to land? And every morning they wake up and it is another day of waiting. I can tell you, Israeli officials are not resting easy. They do believe that this attack is going to come at some point. The only possible off-ramp here is one that was raised by President Biden, which is if there does seem to be progress in these ceasefire talks, it is possible that Iran might agree to hold off, potentially call off this attack altogether, because they don't want to be seen as the ones derailing those negotiations. But there is a whole lot that needs to go right in the right order for that to happen.
Jeff. All right, Raf, we know you'll stay on top of it. Thank you so much.
Well, Columbia University President Manoush Shafik has resigned amid criticism over her handling of the pro-Palestinian campus protests earlier this year.
Columbia was one of many schools across the country that saw big protests erupt on campus over the war in Gaza. Demonstrators set up encampments demanding their schools cut financial ties with Israel and companies that support the war. Shafik faced criticism for calling in police to dismantle the camps and enter a school building that some protesters had occupied. She also faced criticism from House Republicans on Capitol Hill and others accused of failing to tackle anti-Semitism on campus. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton has been following this all along, joins us now with the latest. Walk us through why Shafik has decided to step down now as we get toward the end of the summer, months after this controversy. What did she say in her resignation letter?
Well, good morning, guys. I would describe her resignation letter as sad, but also very resolute. And I'm going to read one part of it that's very important. She writes, "It has been distressing for the community, for me as president, and on a personal level, to find myself, colleagues, and students the subject of threats and abuse." And I read that part because, according to a source with direct knowledge of her decision, spoke to NBC News, this was really the dividing line for her, the pressure mounting from the community, knowing that the protests were going to start again in just a few weeks, the kind of pain, frankly, that she very personally and her family has been through. It just made it untenable. That really was the breaking point.
What's been the reaction from students and staff?
They vary. So some of the staff, they were sending texts to me last night saying good riddance. Others were actually a bit surprised and in some cases a little bit fearful. They know Manoush Shafik. Now there's an interim who is coming from the medical center who people don't know very well. And that's an added variable here to a campus that's already been through a lot of turmoil. We know the students involved in organizing and protesting, though, have celebrated this. They posted on social media basically indicating that any president who takes her place, who doesn't listen to their demands, their movement, will likely be facing the same level of criticism and pressure, though.
Let's talk about the interim. Her name is Katrina Armstrong. As you mentioned, she's the CEO of the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. What more do we know about her? As you mentioned, we're probably going to see more protests in the fall as well, too. What can we expect going forward?
Katrina Armstrong runs the medical center. But what you should know about the medical center is actually quite a ways away from the Morningside Classic Columbia campus. So this is not someone who the undergrad professors or the undergrad students themselves, they don't see her day to day walking the halls. She's not present. Right. So she's going to be new to a lot of people. I spoke to someone who knows her very well, though, and they told me that she is whip smart. She's very blunt. So that is something that could change the dynamic in terms of the way that she communicates with students and faculty. I can also say that faculty really appreciated some of what she shared with the community last night, which is that she really called out the faculty as being the people who create the culture and the dialogue on campus. And that is something that they really appreciate. And they saw that as a sign that she's coming to build relationships relationships, make amends in some cases, and they hope that that helps with the temperature on campus.
All right. Antonia, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us this morning.
And your continued reporting. Let's turn now to the race for the White House. Former President Trump is back on the campaign trail, outlining some of his priorities for a potential second term as president.
Mr. Trump held a rally yesterday in North Carolina where he discussed the economy. Tomorrow, Vice President Harris will roll out some of her economic plans when she visits North Carolina. Now, during Mr. Trump's speech, which lasted more than an hour yesterday, he lobbed a number of personal attacks against his opponent and against President Biden. Today, the current president and VP, Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris, are set to hold their first joint event together since the president dropped out of the race last month. They're going to be in Maryland to discuss lowering costs for Americans. NBC's Garrett Hake has the latest on the 2024 campaign.
Former President Trump in battleground North Carolina, taking aim at Vice President Harris's record on the economy.
Kamala has declared that tackling inflation will be a day one priority. Think of it, for her, but day one for Kamala was 3.5 years ago. Why hasn't she done it?
Blasting Harris for nearly 20% rise in prices over the last 4 years.
Does anyone here feel richer under Kamala Harris than Crooked Joe, than you were during the Trump administration? Is anything less expensive under Kamala Harris and Crooked Joe?
Trump accusing Harris of stealing his proposal to end taxes on tips, which he announced months ago, and she adopted over the weekend.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
Remember, a couple of days ago? And we will have no tax on tips. I said that was my plan.
And making this new pledge.
To help seniors on fixed incomes who are suffering the ravages of inflation, there will be no tax on Social Security. We're going to stop it.
But in a speech billed as an address on the economy, Trump constantly veering off message.
That's the laugh of a crazy person.
Back to his frequent playbook of insulting Harris.
You know why she hasn't done an interview? Because she's not smart.
All despite growing criticism from fellow Republicans as Democrats gain momentum. Former Trump rival turned supporter Nikki Haley.
The campaign is not going to win talking about crowd sizes. It's not going to win talking about what race Kamala Harris is. It's not going to win talking about whether she's dumb.
Meanwhile, Harris will appear with President Biden at an economic event and will speak on the economy on Friday, also in this critical battleground state. Garrett Hake, NBC News, Asheville, North Carolina.
Let's stay on this and bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen for more. John, good morning. Great to see you. Let's start on the Trump campaign and the former president's speech yesterday. We heard a little bit about their spending time criticizing the Biden administration and then attacking Vice President Harris, of course, now his opponent. What are some of the key takeaways from what we heard?
I think the big takeaway is that Trump's plan for attacking Kamala Harris is still scattershot, or maybe a better way to put it is he's not sticking to one plan. On the one hand, he is saying that she's too liberal, which is what his campaign wants him to say. And he is saying that she is tied to the Biden administration and its record on the economy, which is what his campaign wants him to say. And on the other hand, there are still a fusillade of personal attacks on Harris. Him talking about whether or not she's dumb and things like that. So I think he still hasn't really settled on a sharp message.
As we mentioned, Vice President Harris will be in North Carolina tomorrow, where we're expected to hear more about her economic agenda. We are learning new details this morning about some of what we can expect to hear on that. What do we know so far?
I think the headline on that is that she wants to use the federal government to crack down on what she calls corporate price gouging. Trump pointing out that cumulative inflation over the last 4 years has really hit Americans hard. And the answer to that, or at least part of the answer to that, according to the Harris campaign, and we'll see her roll this out, is that corporations are taking advantage of opportunities to raise prices. So she'll use an agency called the Federal Trade Commission to try to crack down on that. She said she'll, her campaign says it's the first federal law to ban price gouging. I think, we'll have to see the details in terms of whether or not there would be some sort of ban on price gouging. And also, there's a long history of attempts to hold down prices through the federal government. But that seems to be the direction she's going in. The Biden administration has long blamed corporations for these prices, and I think this is just a continuation of that.
And John, let's talk running mates. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz accepting an invitation from CBS News for a vice presidential debate against Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, scheduled for October 1st. What should we know about this?
I think we should know that, number one, it's likely to happen, and number two, it could be really brutal. Both of these guys are leaning into their roles as vice presidential candidates as attack dogs. And so, I think the sparks could really fly. Both of them are, extremely articulate and capable of making an argument. And I think the vice presidential debate could be something to tune into.
John, always great to see you. Thank you so much for your reporting here. On a programming note, we will have extensive live coverage of the Democratic National Convention from Chicago all next week. It kicks off on Monday right here on NBC News Now, as well as on NBC.
Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, global emergency. The World Health Organization sounding the alarm about a highly infectious viral disease. What doctors want you to know about Mpox as an outbreak in Africa spreads.
Up first after the break, though, from the red carpet to the ballot box, new research shows just how much influence celebrities have on voters. We will break down the data next.
We're back with a closer look at the state of democracy in America. Despite seeing record turnout at the polls in recent years, when you look at developed countries, the U.S. ranks 31st out of 50 for voter engagement. Now, a recent study from Harvard notes that a lack of civic education and growing distrust of political leaders contribute to this low voter morale. Here's an interesting twist, though. The study also found celebrities could play a big role in motivating voters to be engaged, especially during an election year. Ashley Spillane joins us now with more on this. She's one of the authors of this Harvard study titled Celebrities Strengthening Our Culture of Democracy. I thought this was fascinating, so thank you so much for joining us to talk about it this morning. I mean, before we get into the celebrity angle of all this, give us a little background. I mean, the study noted significantly fewer younger Americans voted in the last presidential election. This always does seem to be an issue, but why is that? What did you find?
Yeah, we find that there are three major reasons Americans in general, but especially young people in the United States, don't participate at as high levels as some of our peer nations. It's lack of information, lack of trust in institutions and leaders, and lack of motivation. And while young people have these relatively low levels of trust in institutions, we found that that's actually not as true with celebrities, which gives a huge opportunity for them to have an impact. Celebrities are uniquely positioned with their platforms to reach many, many people with information and help mobilize young people, but also help change the culture around participation, making it, socially acceptable or even cool to get out and vote or volunteer.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. I mean, what did your research find with how celebrities or other well-known public figures can actually help educate young voters and then motivate them to go cast their ballots?
Yeah, so using their platforms, which are incredibly powerful, these influential figures, athletes, artists, creators can actually help Americans navigate the voting process, which is different in all 50 states across the country. They can share information like key deadlines about registering to vote, submitting your request for an absentee ballot. They can help you find your polling location or an early vote location. They can help you understand what opportunities are out there to even get paid to serve as a poll worker. And then just encouraging people to participate, why it matters. We found that these celebrities who actually share their own journeys about how they decided to get involved, what issues mattered most to them, and why they think it's important to vote really resonated, especially with young people.
So when celebrities or athletes take a stance on a controversial issue or maybe support a specific candidate, there's often this swift backlash from people who disagree, essentially saying, hey, stay in your lane. So why do you think it's important that celebrities play a role in civic engagement? How does it help us? How does it even help them?
Well, what the study proves in an undisputable way is that celebrities do move the needle. There are, ways to track and actually measure the impact, which is what we did looking at efforts from 2018, 2020, and 2022. We could see the tens of thousands of people that Taylor Swift and David Dobrik registered to vote. We could see the thousands of people that Trevor Noah and Billie Eilish were able to sign up to serve as poll workers. And so there really is this undisputable power that celebrities do have to move the needle. And one of the things that I loved most looking at this and researching it was that Draymond Green, for example, said, a lot of people will say, be quiet, don't talk about politics, but they're out there talking about basketball. And, these celebrities have the right to share their views. They have the right to help people navigate the process. And I think, you don't have to listen to them if you don't want to, but they are reaching a demographic, especially amongst young people, that a lot of nonprofits can't reach to help make sure that they can navigate the process. And that makes this really critical.
All right, Ashley Spillane, this is very interesting. Thanks for joining us to have this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Great conversation. Thank you. We've got some sad news out of Hollywood this morning. Acclaimed actress Gena Rowlands has passed away at the age of 94. Modern audiences will know her as older Allie in the big screen version of The Notebook, which was directed by her son.
She starred in dozens of films during a career that began on stage and television in the 1950s. She's probably best known for her vivid portrayals of strong, troubled women in the films Gloria and A Woman Under the Influence. Rowlands received 9 Emmy nominations with 4 wins. She also got an honorary Oscar. Last month, her son revealed that, like her character in The Notebook, she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years earlier. Rowlands is survived by her husband, Robert Forrest, and 3 children.
Well, a growing number of people say they are being discriminated against because of the medication they take. The Department of Justice is already taking action in court, in some cases reaching settlements for people recovering from addiction. NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow spoke to one man who was almost barred from becoming a lawyer because of his opioid addiction treatment.
I call her Ma. Ma. Everyone called her Ma.
Everyone called her Ma. Derek Scott grew up in poverty, raised by his grandmother Nellie in rural Tennessee. Did she tell people that she thought you were going to be a lawyer one day?
Yeah, she did.
She was proud of you?
Yes, very proud of me.
Yeah. After his grandma died, Derek says his recreational use of painkillers snowballed into an addiction. It wasn't until a doctor prescribed a medication called buprenorphine that he says his life began to change.
Not only did it take all the cravings and sickness away, I really got a sense in my mind that I can do this now.
Buprenorphine is one of 3 medications approved by the FDA to treat opioid use disorder. It's a synthetic opioid that, when used as prescribed, doesn't result in a high and curbs withdrawal symptoms and cravings. Top health officials call it the gold standard.
Do we ask them when they come in?
Dr. Stephen Lloyd is head of Tennessee's Opioid Abatement Council.
If you're taking this, you've got 50 to 70% less chance of dying.
But he says these medications carry a stigma.
We're perfectly comfortable putting somebody on medication for the rest of their life because it decreases their chance of heart disease and stroke. Yet when you talk about doing the same thing for addiction, people have a huge problem with it.
While taking the medication, Derek went to college and law school. He passed the bar exam.
Honestly, I didn't think anything could stop me.
But then came the email. In his bar application, Derek had disclosed he'd been convicted of 3 misdemeanors, as well as accused of other criminal charges that would ultimately be expunged. Tennessee's Board of Law Examiners wanted a state program to evaluate him.
I was asked a series of questions related to mental health, and one of those questions was, are you currently prescribed any medication?
And you told them?
And I answered truthfully, and from there, that's when all the problems started with.
Problems, even though the U.S. Justice Department has argued since 2018 that discrimination based on a person's use of medication in recovery violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. But Tennessee monitors were concerned Derek's medication could affect his ability to safely practice law. He underwent 2 evaluations. In both, specialists recommended he get off his medication and seek abstinence-only treatment.
No one knows better than me and my doctor what's best for me and my treatment. How are you going to tell me now that I have to do it your way when your way doesn't always work. My way has worked.
A state program gave Derek a stark choice: stop using buprenorphine or lose his dream of becoming a lawyer. The Tennessee Supreme Court, which oversees the state program, declined our interview requests.
It's just like someone trying to close the door shut on my career.
You don't think the buprenorphine that you've been on for years has affected your cognitive abilities?
Absolutely not.
The Justice Department has taken action in 10 states on cases similar to Derek's, some already resulting in settlements for people in recovery.
What does life look like now?
Derek ultimately reapplied for bar admission. At a hearing last December, the Tennessee Board of Law Examiners heard from his doctor and colleagues. After nearly 3 years of battle, Derek received his law license with no conditions. The Justice Department is now investigating his case. This January, his 2-year-old son watched Derek take his oath.
It was emotional that day. My grandma, knowing that she's watching over me. Yeah, that's a big deal. Here you go.
Now Derek wants to make his son proud and help people as a lawyer. Kate Snow, NBC News, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Coming up, a warning from the World Health Organization about an outbreak of Mpox that's spreading in Africa, why officials are now calling it a global emergency.
Also still to come, the promising new study offering hope to teens struggling with their mental health. We'll have more on that. Stay with us. You're watching Morning News Now.
Breaking news this morning, a Russian-American woman has been sentenced to 12 years in jail after a Russian court found her guilty of treason for donating money to a charity that supports Ukraine. Ksenia Karolina is a ballerina with dual citizenship who lives in Los Angeles. She was visiting family in Russia when she was arrested earlier this year. She pleaded guilty in a closed-door trial last week. Her supporters say she paid $51 to a New York-based charity. Her sentencing comes after last week's major prisoner swap between Russia and the United States. Karolina's lawyer says his client hopes she would be included in any future swap. Well, turning now to health news, the World Health Organization has declared the Mpox virus a global public health emergency for the second time in 2 years.
It comes after the virus was detected in other African countries following an initial outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The WHO's Director General made the emergency declaration yesterday, saying a global effort was needed to stop the spread and save lives.
The detection and rapid spread of a new clade of Mpox in eastern DRC, its detection in neighboring countries that had not previously reported Mpox, and the potential for further spread within Africa and beyond is very worrying. It's clear that a coordinated international response is essential to stop these outbreaks and save lives.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. John Torres is now joins us to talk more about this. Just remind us, help us understand what Mpox is, how quickly it spreads.
So Mpox is a virus that was initially discovered in the 50s, and up until recently, it was only animal-to-animal transmission. That's all the scientists were looking at. About 2017, they started noticing it started going over into the human population, and then began that human-to-human transmission. 2022 was the big crux behind this, because that's when the big outbreak was. And in 2022, there were actually 95,000 cases, with unfortunately 200 deaths associated with it. In 2022, you heard him use the word clade. When he says clade, think of variant. So there's a variant in 2022 that wasn't quite as susceptible, quite as lethal, or quite as virulent, infectious as this one now, which is the clade 1. And that's the concern, because now they have this new variant type of Mpox going there. And up until this year, remember, back then, 95,000 cases, 200 deaths. So far this year, 14,000 cases, but we have 524 deaths associated with it. It's spread to 13 countries in Africa, hasn't spread beyond that. The symptoms, essentially, you start getting that flu-like symptoms, fever, sore throat, backache, just feeling under the weather, and then it gives that classic rash. Looks like a chickenpox rash, and that's the classic rash behind this.
What does it actually mean for this to be declared this global public health emergency? Does it provide more resources to it, and should we be worried about it spreading here?
That's exactly what it means. It's providing more resources, and what the World Health Organization is hoping that other countries jump in, because countries like the United States, we have lots of vaccine for this, and those vaccines, they're having a hard time getting into Africa, so they can get them down there, get the vaccines down there. There are some antivirals that work sort of okay. They can get those down there as well, and just a lot of resources.
How do we stop the spread? And as you noted, I mean, it hit America 2 years ago. A lot of people did get vaccinated then. Are those vaccines still good for those folks?
Those vaccines are still good, and the CDC has come out saying if you're fully vaccinated in 2022, you do not need a booster at this point. You're still covered. But essentially, the best way to do this is to make sure that people are vaccinated, get vaccines to the susceptible populations, and the susceptible populations have increased now, and it's male, female, children are all being affected. And so getting it down, those resources down there is important because since it is a public health emergency of international concern, we know this can spread. It can spread outside of those areas and spread even to the United States. We have to be very careful.
Important information, Dr. John Torres. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, there's some promising new data out from the CDC on the state of the mental health of our teens. And there's a little bit of good news here. According to what's called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, fewer teens are reporting ongoing feelings of sadness and hopelessness. Of course, mental health among high school students has become a major concern since the COVID pandemic. And although we are seeing progress, there is still a lot of work to be done. Dr. Kathleen Ethier joins us now for more on this report. She is the director of the CDC's Division of Adolescent and School Health. Doctor, it is so wonderful to see you. Always great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on this morning. And I understand that this is really the first time we've seen improvements in this since 2009, which sounds like amazing news. Walk us through some of the highlights in this report.
Yeah, I mean, over the last 10 years, we're still seeing significant increases. So, you know, the same increases we were seeing prior to the pandemic, and then in 2021, we're still kind of over that whole time period, still we're still seeing. But what we're seeing since 2021, really for the first time, is improvement. And that is great news. So we are not out of the woods yet by any stretch. We cannot take our foot off the gas. But we are starting to see these improvements. So between 21 and 2023, particularly among girls, we're seeing improvements in those depressive symptoms. And we're also seeing among Black students improvements in the percent who said that they attempted suicide in the last year. And that, again, is really good news. So as I said, we don't want to take our foot off the gas. We still need to continue to come together and support young people. But there's some hope there in this data.
Absolutely. You and I have been talking since a YRBS, as it's called, came out and really had some startling numbers in it. And we talked so much about really specific help that the CDC was providing to parents, to educators, to people who are around schools and around young people. Why do you think it is that we're seeing an improvement? Have some of those things that you have recommended been actually put into practice and made a difference?
I think, you know, since 2021, you know, and as I said, we were seeing these increases in depressive symptoms and suicidal thoughts and behaviors prior to the pandemic. But I think all of our experience during the pandemic told us that when we're isolated from each other, our mental health suffers, and we really saw that in our young people. And so getting back into the swing of things, getting back into our normal activities, of course, is helpful. But at the same time, at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, in the conversations, for instance, that you and I have been having, that you've been having with others around this topic, when we come together, when we put concerted effort behind it, when we make sure that young people's schools are connecting them to services and putting in place efforts to support them and support their mental health, we can see these improvements.
Absolutely. One of the things in here that was a little startling, though, is this rise of violence that students experience at school, especially when we think about the context that we're trying to make schools a safe place generally, but certainly a place where you can go to access resources when it comes to mental health. What type of violence are we talking about? What are we seeing happen on campus?
So we've seen increases. The two questions that we ask about school-based violence are, have you been threatened or injured with a weapon at school in the last year, and have you been bullied at school? And, you know, we saw a dip in the percentage of students who said that they'd been bullied in school in 2021, I think primarily because young people hadn't been in school. And so some of this is, I think, you know, young people returning back into the school environment, bringing their mental health issues back into the school environment. You know, we primarily ask about depressive symptoms, but also we know that anger issues, ability to negotiate, you know, all of those kind of self-management issues probably also suffered during the pandemic. And so we've been hearing from our school partners that schools feel more disrupted since everybody's been back. And so I think that's probably some of what we're experiencing. We've been working on providing schools with resources like our School Mental Health Action Guide, like our What Works in Schools program, that we know can help teachers and other school staff and counselors put efforts into place to really help young people with those kind of management skills and those negotiation skills. And I think we just have to continue to do that.
We just have a few seconds left, Doctor, but just a word of advice for anybody who's listening to this, who wants to be that trusted adult, as we call it, for any young person. What is your best advice for supporting young people?
Connect. Connect, connect, connect. Make sure that you are reaching out. Make sure that you're checking in with the young people in your lives. Make sure that you are offering them opportunities to come to you, to be available to them. We know how important connection is, and just to continue to do that.
Absolutely. Dr. Kathleen Ethier, it is always a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for the important work you're doing and for your time this morning. We appreciate it. Great to see you. And if you or anyone you know is struggling, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline right there on your screen, just 988.
Coming up, we are talking taxes.
That's right. Tax season still months away. Don't worry. But it's not too early to start planning.
That's why we have tax guru and friend of the show, Mark Stieber, in the house. He's going to join us with some tips. Next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. We might be in the dog days of summer, but if it's not too early to talk about Halloween, then perhaps it's not too early to start thinking about preparing for tax season next year.
That also feels too early, though. I know our next guest disagrees. We're about halfway until people can begin filing their tax returns, but there is plenty you can do now to make sure you're getting the biggest return possible. For more on this, we've got our friend, Chief Tax Information Officer for Jackson Hewitt Tax Services, Mark Stieber, with us. Mark, good morning.
Good to be here.
Always great to see you and to be made to feel like I got to get on it right now.
137 days. It's not too far.
Okay, why is it important to get started now?
What's your single largest financial transaction by far? And you're going to be doing it each year for the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So you need to develop some best practices. And one of those is looking at the halfway point of the year. You do it with your football game. You do it with your other soccer games. Look at your halfway point and see where you're going to come out. So you can avoid shock and surprise, and in many cases, disappointment. Because life's complicated and getting more complicated. So you'd be well served to look at your taxes with 8 more paychecks coming and adjust to get the result you want because you have more control than you think.
Well, yeah, what more does that mean? I mean, what are all the things we should be thinking about when it comes to a mid-year tax check?
Well, the first thing is reflect on last year. Did you like your outcome? Did you get disappointment with your refund? Did you owe, for gosh sake, because you didn't plan on that? You have 8 more paychecks or so to adjust for that. So if you had a little refund last year and you were expecting a big one, but something happened and you owed more, put a little bit more aside with your withholding or estimated payments. You can adjust it online at most companies and put an extra $50 aside with each paycheck for the next 8 to offset that. On the other hand, if you get a big refund last year and you might need that money now, perhaps consider withholding a little less on your paychecks each week and putting that money to better use in your own life. But it won't happen automatic. It's not just an end game that you have no control over. So look at where you were and adjust from there.
So many people are self-employed now, and tomorrow's actually National Independent Worker Day. Filing's a little different for those folks.
A lot different. The first thing you need to know is you're responsible for your own taxes. As an employee, my boss takes my money out and gives it to the government, and then I reconcile. As a self-employed person, and many of those guys are operating pretty thinly with no CPA or accountant or a tax guy, they find out on January 23rd when they file their taxes, oh, I owe money for the whole year, and that's a real big shock. What they need to know is they're supposed to pay it in through the year, but they have a lot more benefit and deductions than, say, an employee has. They're most importantly. And if you're doing it kind of a hybrid, you're an employee, but you have a side gig, you really need to look at your taxes because you could have all sorts of things going on.
Interesting. What is like the one thing, if we're nearing the weekend, if you were like, this weekend I want you to do this for your mid-year checkup, what is it?
Find your last pay stub. Now we're not at really the mid-year point, we're really at the 2/3 point. Take your 7 or 8 months worth of income so far if you're an employee, add another 2 or 3 months to that, see where your income is. Do the same thing for your taxes. I write in the margin of my tax return just where the items are and do a rudimentary computation, and if it doesn't come out where you are, pass on watching the cat and dog videos for another hour hour, do a little bit more of a sophisticated. Doesn't have to be massively complicated. In the margin of a tax return works, but do something. Spend an hour looking at your largest financial transaction. It can pay benefits, big benefits, at least reduce stress come January.
I'm just grateful that you are personally helping me now, because that makes me feel like I don't necessarily need to know how to do all
Have you
that.
done your mid-year check yet?
No, I haven't signed the OU documents.
I'll be calling you Monday.
Mark Stever, thank you so much. Always great to have you
Thank
here.
you. Staying on your wallet, the Federal Trade Commission cracking down on fake product reviews.
CNBC's Silvana Henao has that and other money news for us. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Good morning. Yeah, so the Federal Trade Commission has voted to ban marketers from using fake reviews, such as those that are generated by AI. Now, the ban also prohibits marketers from exaggerating their own influence. For example, paying for bots to inflate how many followers they have. More advertisers are turning to chatbots such as ChatGPT to quickly generate user reviews for products they sell online. Elon Musk's AI company xAI is rolling out 2 new models of its Grok chatbot. Grok 2 and Grok 2 Mini offer an upgraded performance and the ability for users to generate and publish new types of images, including those of politicians and copyrighted content, directly to their X feed. Now, unlike rivals such as Google's Gemini, Grok appears to have far fewer restrictions. The beta version can be accessed by premium X users. And now you can fly anywhere and as many times as you want throughout Europe for one low price. Budget carrier Wizz Air is offering an annual all-you-can-fly pass for 499 euros. That's about $550. Passengers can book flights to any of the airline's international destinations, including Athens, Madrid, and Paris, up to 3 days before departure, but you have to act fast. This price is only available until tomorrow, when it goes up to about $660, guys.
I've never heard of that airline.
Me either.
Me either.
And what a concept.
Yeah.
It's kind of awesome.
It's like
but
a buffet,
It's
all you can eat.
Sounds pretty
Yeah.
I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Savannah.
Thanks. Coming up, he's an accomplished scientist, and he's not even old enough to get his driver's license.
New this morning, Time Magazine just named its Kid of the Year. After the break, we are going to talk to this incredibly talented teen. There he is. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. Every year, Time Magazine honors one young person under the age of 16 who is blazing a trail of hope for the future. The prestigious Kid of the Year award highlights the accomplishments of budding young leaders in fields like social justice, science, and business.
We are thrilled to be one of the first to publicly announce that the 2024 Time Kid of the Year is 15-year-old scientist Heyman Bekele. He's being recognized for developing a groundbreaking bar of soap that could one day be used to treat skin cancers like melanoma. And this morning, we are lucky to be joined by the Kid of the Year himself, Heyman Bekele. Heyman, congratulations. Good to have you with us. I mean, what went through your mind when you learned you were going to be Kid of the Year? You're going to be on the cover of Time. You're going to have a really, really, really cool photo on the cover of Time. How do you feel about all this?
It is such an incredible feeling, just truly surreal. I mean, to be completely honest, I still haven't even fully taken it in. But more than anything, it's a great feeling and also really inspiring to see that, you know, I'm just 15, but yet my ideas can still be heard. And it's super motivating moving forward.
Tell us about this soap you created that, as Joe mentioned, could one day be used to treat something like melanoma. How does it work? How did you make it? What inspired you to make it?
Sure. So SCTS, which stands for Skin Cancer Treating Soap, is pretty much this compound-based bar of soap that's charged with different cancer-fighting chemicals, the main one being this ingredient called imiquimod. I was first inspired to make it not really from the aspect of skin cancer, but rather from the aspect of affordable and accessible healthcare. I grew up in Ethiopia, and I saw so many people working really long hours under the hot sun, which can develop different problems such as skin cancer. And so when I realized how big of an issue this really was, I wanted to create something that could serve as a treatment for skin cancer, but also be affordable and accessible to everyone. And so that's what really stemmed the idea of skin cancer treating soap.
Heyman, what's incredible is you're looking to turn this project into a nonprofit organization by 2028. Talk about that, why it's important to you. And I mean, how do you make time to do this on top of, I don't know, school and other stuff like that?
Sure. So by 2028, I hope to turn skin cancer treating soap into more than just a simple passion project, but more into more of a nonprofit organization where I can provide equitable and accessible skin cancer treatment to truly as many people as they need it. And so really my main reason for this is, I guess, from the start, the big idea with all of this was just impact towards those that couldn't afford skin cancer treatment. And so I guess coming full circle back into that, once FDA certification has been acquired and things are starting to move forward on track, I really do hope to turn it more into a nonprofit to then again go back to serving directly towards people that need it.
Heyman, what do you want other people your age to know? If they want to make an impact, they don't know how to get started, they think maybe they're too young for someone to listen to them or for them to be able to make a difference. What do you want them to know?
I think that my number one piece of advice would just be to take the shot in the dark, whatever idea you might have. Every big breakthrough really did just start with a little bit of creativity, people tinkering or messing around, and all of a sudden they came up with a really great invention. So always trust your creativity, and really whatever idea you have, just go for it.
Brilliant and thoughtful. Heyman Bekele, congratulations once again. I hope you're celebrating today and throughout the day, and thank you for joining us this morning.
So neat. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now. Good morning. Thank you for kicking off your Thursday with us. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, we're tracking Ernesto as it strengthens over the Atlantic. Its sights now set on Bermuda. The massive storm leaving in its wake destruction on the island of Puerto Rico. Hundreds of thousands of people there remain in the dark as the nation reels from a power crisis with no end in sight. We are on the ground in Bermuda with how residents there are preparing for a direct hit. We're also watching the latest round of high-stakes negotiations in the Middle East today. Leaders from around the globe once again trying to strike a comprehensive ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. But with Hamas now signaling it won't be part of these talks, what could happen? Our Richard Engel has the latest in just a moment. Plus, shaking it off, the smattering of Swifties now taking over London, eagerly awaiting the pop icon's return to the stage there tonight. It comes after an alleged foiled terror plot rocked a community that is bonded by their love of Taylor and each other. And later in the hour, we're going to bring you some important new medical findings. They show that our bodies go through some pretty rapid changes as we get older, specifically in our 40s and our 60s. We're going to walk you through what exactly those changes are and what you and your doctor should watch for when you reach your golden years. Not that your 40s are your golden years.
Yeah.
But you do start to feel some aches and pains. Yeah. I can tell you that.
Really interesting conversation.
I know. I'm looking forward to that one. I'll be taking notes. We're going to start this hour, of course, with Hurricane Ernesto, which is churning north up the Atlantic Ocean. Today, hundreds of thousands of people in Puerto Rico still don't have power or water after the storm hit the island as a tropical storm yesterday. Heavy rains caused a major dam to burst and multiple rivers to swell, forcing several residents to seek shelter.
Now the Category 1 hurricane is taking aim at Bermuda, where it's expected to make landfall Saturday. Forecasters predict it could become a Category 3 storm by then. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas is tracking Ernesto for us from Southampton, Bermuda. Guad, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. The National Hurricane Center has issued a hurricane warning for Bermuda, while Puerto Rico is still assessing the damage left by Ernesto. President Biden has approved an emergency declaration, which will give more resources to the local communities as they deal with that damage. A lot of people have been displaced, with hundreds in shelters across the island.
This morning, a power crisis across Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Ernesto. The powerful storm, which is now a hurricane, battering the island with winds up to 85 miles per hour. tearing roofs off of homes and leaving nearly 500,000 people in the dark. Luma Energy, the private company in charge of power distribution, pressed repeatedly for a timeline on restoration, but offering no estimate, only telling Today.
I can't tell you how long it'll take to us. We do know in certain areas that the damage has been limited, so we should be able to move fast.
Ernesto brushing the island as a tropical storm Wednesday, but still dropping nearly a foot of rain. The downpours and flooded roads sweeping away cars and leading to rescues. The Comedio Dam overflowing as officials say at least 3 major rivers burst their banks, forcing some evacuations in the town of Tua Baja. The storm also barreled through the Virgin Islands, leaving thousands on the U.S. side in the dark.
We want to turn on the power, but we don't know where lines are down, so we can't just turn on the power willy-nilly. We got to make sure we don't electrify anybody.
This morning, Hurricane Ernesto is strengthening over the Atlantic, with Bermuda expected to begin feeling its effects as early as Friday, as officials warn those in its path.
This is not the time to underestimate the power of nature.
And Luma, the power energy in Puerto Rico, is expected to use helicopters today and assess some of that damage. They have to check a lot of the power lines and make sure that they are ready for the power to be turned back on. That's going to take time. They're going to actually get help also from the National Guard and their own helicopters. So hopefully more people get their power restored today. Meanwhile, here in Bermuda, local officials did hold a press conference yesterday reminding residents of the necessary preparations with food, water, and the usual stuff they know they have to do when a hurricane is coming this way. Now, Ernesto is not expected to make landfall in the U.S., but the forecast does indicate it could affect the surf and cause rip currents along the East Coast, something for people to keep in mind. Savannah, Joe?
All right, Guad, thank you and stay safe.
Let's get a closer look at Ernesto with your Morning News Now weather.
Ryan Hanrahan, chief meteorologist from our station in Connecticut, joins us. Ryan, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Savannah and Joe. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we are watching Ernesto. It is strengthening as it moves to the north, is moving away from Puerto Rico, and it is heading toward Bermuda. Let's take a look at the currents with this storm. Winds 85 miles per hour. It's moving to the north at 13 miles per hour, but it's actually going to speed up. It's going to accelerate as it moves across the Atlantic Ocean today into the day tomorrow. So here's the expected track of Ernesto. And check this out. Bermuda is not a very big island in the middle of the Atlantic, but it looks like Ernesto is going to come very close to a direct hit. This would put Bermuda on the right, more powerful side of the storm, so the winds will be quite ferocious in Bermuda. In fact, it approaches as a strong Category 2, weak Category 3 hurricane, winds 110, 115 miles per hour as the storm moves through Bermuda. Destructive winds, flash flooding a possibility. We have a hurricane warning in effect. Bermuda, no stranger to hurricanes, and Bermuda can get some powerful hurricanes. And the last one to hit was Hurricane Paulette back in September 2020. That was a Category 2 storm. This one will likely be fairly similar. Then the storm recurves out to sea, as many of our hurricanes typically do. But even though it's about 600 miles off the eastern seaboard, it will produce some powerful waves and some surf, and that will lead to some rip currents. So if you are planning to go to the beaches this weekend, from Cape Cod on down through New Jersey, Delaware, the Outer Banks, we are looking at the potential for some pretty nasty conditions with those rip currents developing. In the Midwest, we've got some storms out there. We'll see those storms moving across portions of Minnesota, Wisconsin, down through Chicago and Missouri. Those storms will move to the east, and by tomorrow we'll see rain moving across portions of New York and Pennsylvania, especially western New York, western Pennsylvania. Should be dry along the I-95 corridor. We've got a risk for some flash flooding today across portions of the Midwest, particularly around St. Louis, down toward Paducah. Rainfall totals could be anywhere 2, 3, maybe even 4 inches of rain with any storms that develop, and that whole system moves to the east toward the northeast by the weekend.
All right, the rains are coming. All right, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, the economy is taking center stage on the campaign trail this week. Vice President Harris is set to roll out her economic agenda tomorrow in North Carolina. Meanwhile, former President Trump held a rally yesterday in the state where he outlined some of his economic goals while serving up some attacks on his opponent. NBC's Garrett Hake has the latest.
Hey, Joe, Savannah, good morning. Look, this was a speech about the issue that Donald Trump's campaign believes is the most important issue in the race here in a state that he absolutely cannot afford to lose. Now, Donald Trump hammered Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on rising prices, but he also engaged in the kind of harsh personal attacks that even his Republican allies have urged him to avoid.
Overnight in the Tar Heel state, former President Donald Trump on the economic attack, hammering his opponent Kamala Harris over rising prices.
Is anything less expensive under Kamala Harris and Crooked Joe?
The attack's coming even as we learned Wednesday the inflation rate cooled in July to the lowest level since the pandemic ended. President Biden asked earlier by NBC's Gabe Gutierrez if the U.S. had beaten inflation.
Yes, yes, yes. I told you we're going to have a soft landing.
But the Trump campaign sees inflation as a key Democratic weakness they intend to highlight.
Kamala has declared that tackling inflation will be a day one priority. But day one for Kamala was 3.5 years ago. Why hasn't she done it?
The Harris campaign responding to Trump with a statement reading in part, quote, if Trump gets power, middle-class taxes will go up by $2,500 a year. Inflation will skyrocket and jobs will be shipped overseas. Trump's speech was billed as economic-focused, but the candidate frequently lost focus himself, veering into the personal attacks on Harris that Republican allies have been urging him to avoid.
We have stupid people like Kamala and Joe running our country. Her laugh is career-threatening. You know why she hasn't done an interview? Because she's not smart.
Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, once again in the spotlight for his past comments about women. This 2020 podcast interview in which he discusses the positive role of grandparents in children's lives, drawing new scrutiny.
They spoil him. There's sort of all the classic stuff that grandparents do to grandchildren. But it makes him a much better human being to have exposure to his grandparents.
Well, I don't know.
And the evidence on this, by the way, is like super clear.
That's the whole purpose of the postmenopausal female in theory.
But let me ask you a question, not knowing the answer.
Please.
When your child was born, did your in-laws, and particularly your mother-in-law, show up in some huge way?
She lived with us for a year.
Right.
So, you know.
So I didn't know the answer to that.
Right. No,
because that's this weird unadvertised feature of marrying an Indian woman.
No,
A Vance spokesperson responding to that, saying the media is putting words in Vance's mouth, and that, quote, of course he doesn't agree with that podcast host. Now, this comes as we're getting new swing state polls from the nonpartisan Cook Political Report, which show Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump or tied with him in 6 out of the 7 battleground states. This is a look back over the last couple of weeks. All these results are within the margin of error, but it shows a very close race all around the country. Joe, Savannah.
Garrett, thank you so much. On a programming note, we will have extensive live coverage of the Democratic National Convention from Chicago all next week. It kicks off on Monday right here on NBC News Now, as well as on NBC.
Now to the escalating tensions in the Middle East. The Gaza Health Ministry says that Israel's military offensive has now killed more than 40,000 Palestinians in the enclave since the war started 10 months ago. That news comes as negotiators hold a new round of high-stakes talks today aimed at ending the war. But since Hamas is not taking part, it's not clear how much can be accomplished. For more, let's bring in NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. He is in Jerusalem with the latest. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. I can tell you there is not a lot of optimism going into these talks, but the fact that they are still taking place, and at times even that was in doubt, shows that there is at least a chance for a breakthrough.
The Israeli military released new video overnight of what it says are its air defenses stopping incoming fire from Lebanon. But so far, no retaliation from Iran for the assassination of a Hamas leader visiting Tehran 2 weeks ago. So perhaps there's a window for diplomacy. Ceasefire and hostage talks are resuming in Qatar this morning with the heads of the CIA, Israel's Mossad, and officials from Egypt and Qatar. Hamas refused to go. A diplomat briefed on the talks says the group is expected to be consulted after. The U.S. says the talks will continue.
We fully expect these talks to move forward as they should.
And is pushing for a resolution.
It is far time for the remaining hostages to be released, which of course include American citizens, and bring relief to the people of Gaza under the deal that is now on the table.
In Gaza, This was the line for food handouts. Yesterday, we showed you 2 newborns. Multiple witnesses say they were killed by Israeli fire. We returned to see how their father, Mohammed Abu al-Qamsan, is trying to piece his life together. Looking through the baby clothes he bought with his wife, killed in the same strike. He sums up his feelings simply. They broke my heart, he said. The Israeli military responded to our request for information, saying in part, the details of the incident as published are not currently known to the IDF, and that the IDF targets only military objectives and employs various measures to minimize harm to civilians.
Israel and Hamas remain far apart on several key issues. One of the most fundamental is the future of Gaza itself. Who will run it, and will there be an ongoing Israeli military presence? And there are, of course, the issues of hostages, the future of Hamas leaders, a lot to overcome. But because of the tremendous pressure, because of the risks of this going wrong, there are many mediators, political leaders, officials, all trying to pressure the two sides to reach some sort of a deal quickly.
All right, Richard, thank you so much.
Back here in the U.S., let's get the latest on immigration. According to officials and migrant shelter operators in multiple states across the U.S., buses of migrants haven't been coming consistently in months. That's because of a massive decline in apprehensions at the southern border. After the U.S. had a record number of border crossings in December of 2023, as you can see on your screen, that number has dropped this summer to the lowest monthly total since President Joe Biden took office. Joining us now with more on this is NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Julia, good morning. So we're hearing from both the White House as well as Texas Governor Greg Abbott attributing these lower numbers to their own policies. What are they both saying?
Well, you know what? The Biden administration is saying that this is because in June, the Biden administration rolled out those new asylum restrictions that allows Border Patrol to basically tell anyone who crosses the border illegally that they are not eligible for asylum unless they meet a higher bar. And then the Abbott administration is saying that that drop is due to their harder policies from Operation Lone Star that allows some of their own law enforcement to come down to the border and enforce immigration law. A lot of what Abbott has been doing has been held up in court, but his buses are something that continued to roll. In fact, before the RNC, Governor Abbott said that he would continue to bus migrants to major cities. The only problem is we spoke to many of those cities, and so far we haven't been able to find any evidence across Philadelphia, LA, DC, Chicago, Denver, or New York City that Abbott has sent any of those migrants from Texas to those cities since June. In fact, you can see why. I'm down here in downtown El Paso. This is a church. I've been outside many times. It's a place that shelters migrants. In the past, when I've been here, I've seen hundreds of migrants, even little children, sleeping out here on the streets. And today, it's really back to being a homeless shelter for the local population of the city because there are simply so many fewer migrants. You mentioned those June numbers. We understand they've now fallen even further to under 2,000 a day. Savannah.
Julia, this, of course, remains one of the biggest issues for voters. And maybe while buses haven't been as frequent right now, June wasn't that long ago. I think it's something a lot of people who live in those cities remember impacts that they were seeing. How significant are the lower numbers? What could this mean for potential action to come at the border if it is easing up in some of those major cities, blue cities, where migrants had been bused?
You're right. I mean, I think that the influx of migrants in those cities, not just because Abbott was busing them there, but because some of them were choosing to go to those cities, really changed the conversation on immigration last year. It was something that the Biden administration had to contend with on a whole new level. This wasn't just an idea that Trump was floating and they could point to as being xenophobic. It was having an impact on people who were sending their kids to school or trying to get health care in cities like New York or Denver. But with the easing up of sheer numbers coming across the border, with people like Governor Abbott not being able to bus migrants and make those political statements that could take some of the heat off of the Biden administration and the Harris campaign going into the November elections, although sometimes reality and perception don't always match up. So we're here today to look at exactly what things are looking like at the border. And we should point out, yes, there are still nearly 2,000 illegal border crossings per day. It's not zero.
And what has the effect been in cities like New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, where, as you mentioned, we were hearing from a lot of citizens who hadn't really dealt with this issue on their doorstep? What's it been like now?
Well, they're seeing their streets clear as well. We know in Denver, they used to have a problem where they didn't have enough space in their shelters for migrants. We're hearing that they're no longer having that problem now. Cities like New York, they think that more migrants were able to get temporary work authorization, trying to get more of them off the streets. It's not an issue that's as prevalent and in people's faces as it was, say, this time last year, Savannah.
Julia, thank you very much. And you can catch Julia's full report on this tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. That's at 6:30 Eastern Time. There is much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including a Swiftie takeover hitting London this morning ahead of Taylor's 5-night Eras Tour run at Wembley Stadium. It's her first show, of course, following those cancellations in Vienna over an alleged terror threat. So what should fans expect? We are live across the pond up next.
But first, after the break, Scott Peterson back in the national spotlight this morning. He's now breaking his silence nearly 20 years after his murder trial that gripped America. Those stories and more after this.
Welcome back. It's been nearly 20 years since Scott Peterson was put on trial and convicted of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn son. Now the high-profile case is once again making headlines as the subject of 2 new docuseries.
Yeah, both series are offering a different perspective on what has become one of the most notable true crime cases of the 21st century. It all comes as Peterson continues his efforts to try and get a retrial. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda joins us now with more on this. Emily, good morning.
Hey guys, good morning to you. These dueling docuseries deliver 2 crucial voices we've rarely heard in this case: Lacey's own mother and Scott Peterson himself. This morning, we have an exclusive clip of Peterson speaking out in his own words 2 decades after he was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife, Lacey.
It's the chilling case that's still a national obsession.
He didn't want to be a father, and this is the way he thought about getting out of it.
Now, for the first time since going to prison, convicted murderer Scott Peterson is speaking out.
Why should anyone want to hear your side of the story?
Because I didn't kill my family.
In Face-to-Face with Scott Peterson by Peacock, a division of our parent company Comcast, the 51-year-old gives his own version of events from behind prison walls. In interviews done over an entire year, Peterson, appearing in good health with longer hair, continues to maintain his innocence and is confident in ongoing efforts to free him.
There's no forensic evidence. There's nothing to tie him to the murder.
Peterson was sentenced to death in 2004 for the 2002 murders of his wife Lacey and their unborn son Connor after their bodies washed up in San Francisco Bay near where Peterson said he'd gone fishing months earlier.
She trusted her husband, and he betrayed her.
In the Netflix docuseries American Murder, Lacey Peterson, Lacey's at the center of the story. Her mother, Sharon Rocha, speaking out for the first time in years about Peterson's conviction.
I can't say we were all excited and happy about it. That's not the feeling that I had at all. Just a relief.
Also speaking out, Peterson's former girlfriend, Amber Fry, whose decision to come forward about their relationship helped prosecutors establish a motive.
On the stand, I wasn't just sitting there alone, but I was sitting there for Lacey and her unborn child.
In Face-to-Face, Peterson admits his affair with Fry was a terrible mistake, saying he withheld that information from police to focus on finding Lacey. In 2020, California's Supreme Court overturned Peterson's death sentence, citing jury selection errors by the trial judge, and resentenced him to life without parole. He was denied a new trial in 2022. Now backed by the LA Innocence Project, Peterson is trying again.
The Peacock series Face to Face with Scott Peterson comes out on August 20th. American Murder Lacey Peterson on Netflix is already streaming.
So what is next in Scott Peterson's appeal for a new trial?
So his attorneys are hoping to win him a new trial by finding new evidence, especially focusing on DNA evidence with all this advancing technology. So far, the court has only agreed to allow the retesting, the DNA testing of a single piece of duct tape that was found on Lacey Peterson's leg during the autopsy. Meantime, the prosecutors are calling this a fishing expedition, and Scott Peterson's family still maintains they believe he's innocent, and they think that the evidence will show that.
All right. Emily, thanks for the update. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Emily. Well, tonight, Taylor Swift will be back on stage as she kicks off a 5-date run at London's Wembley Stadium. This comes, of course, after her 3 Vienna shows were canceled last week over that alleged terror scare. NBC News international correspondent Kelly Kobaya is there outside the stadium where Swifties are ready for it all to begin in just a few hours. Kelly, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. Yeah, they are definitely ready and very eager to get inside. And you can see some of the additional security measures already in place. The stewards behind me now checking everyone who goes up those steps and gets closer in to the concert venue. Now, Taylor Swift hasn't spoken about the events of Vienna last week just yet, but we spoke to a lot of fans. They said that they're yes, nervous, but also really excited and very determined to be here singing along tonight. Taylor Swift getting ready to thrill the massive crowds again tonight in London. Hundreds of thousands of fans flocking to Wembley Stadium for the superstar's last 5 shows of her era's European tour.
As soon as we get in the stadium, I'm going to freak out, probably.
We're excited. We're trying to get as close to Taylor as we can.
I'm super excited. I traveled across the pond.
Prepared to serenade 90,000 fans from around the world each night. Her 3 shows in Vienna, Austria were canceled last week. Police arresting 3 alleged Islamic State extremists, foiling a plot for a knife and bomb attack at the concerts. British police have said there are no heightened concerns for Wembley. The security is set to be tight, including a ban on Taylor-gating. When ticketless Swifties gather by the thousands outside arenas, like this 40,000 fan crowd in Munich last month. A Swiftie swap popping up on social media.
I see Taylor Swift tomorrow at the Eras Tour in Wembley.
London tickets offered to fans who missed out on Vienna. Others here hoping to get lucky.
We came to London hoping to still make it happen.
Fans are looking forward, picking Swift-inspired outfits, fearless, and hoping for more epic surprises. After the last London leg of the Eras Tour, with princes and a princess among the fans, Tom Cruise swapping friendship bracelets, and this unforgettable moment, Swift's boyfriend Travis Kelce making his stage debut. And Taylor Swift has already announced a lineup of special guests for these 5 performances, including Suki Waterhouse and Ray, among a few others. But there are rumors, Savannah, of another very big name appearing on stage with Taylor on one of these nights. Unfortunately, I know no more than that. Can't help you out. But she does love her surprises.
And us Swifties love to try to chase them down and guess what's going to happen. Kelly, thank you so much. Very excited. Can't wait to see. We don't know, actually. Yeah. But there is a rumor that something big is going to happen. Okay. And also there's always the rumor that potentially she's announcing a re-recorded album called Reputation. So all right. I'll see.
All right, coming up, a medical breakthrough that's giving one man with ALS his voice back with AI.
After the break, we'll take a closer look at how a computer chip implanted into his brain made it all possible. That's next. We are back now with a look at a new technology that is giving people with paralysis the ability to communicate. As NBC News medical contributor Dr. John Torres reports, it's now helping one man with ALS.
This ALS patient, Casey Harrell, lost his ability to speak, but now
it feels a lot like me.
Harrell talking again through a revolutionary brain implant, an AI-powered app.
It makes people cry who have not heard me in a while.
This video, provided by UC Davis Health, where the technology was developed, shows how brain activity is translated into speech. And not just any speech, but a version of Harold's own voice, cloned with machine learning using previous recordings.
We're putting electrode arrays into what's called the speech motor cortex. We're listening into all of these couple hundred neurons that we can detect, and we're using some machine learning algorithms to decipher what that pattern of neural activity means.
The technology is still in the early stages of testing, but already it's much faster than more traditional assistive devices like the one Stephen Hawking famously used that track muscle, facial, or eye movements to slowly type out words.
If you walked in the room and you said, "Hey, how are you?" I think you could get a response back in about 10 or 20 seconds.
And researchers say in a new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that it's 97% accurate, which they tell us is on par with the listening abilities of standard voice assistants like Siri. The technology, life-changing for both Harold and his family.
Not being able to communicate is so frustrating and demoralizing. It is like you are trapped.
It would move where I wanted it to.
Others working on unlocking the power of brain implant technology as well. Elon Musk's Neuralink company made headlines earlier this year after posting a video apparently showing a paralyzed man using implant technology to play chess on a computer. Massachusetts General Hospital, Stanford University, and other startups pushing ahead too.
There are a lot of new startups. One of the biggest advances that they're doing is they're making this whole system fully wireless.
Harold hoping many more can benefit from work like this.
I hope that we are at a time when everyone who is like me have the same opportunity as I do to have a device like this that will help them communicate.
That is so cool to see. Our thanks to Dr. John Torres for that report. We're sticking with your health and taking a look at the effects of getting older. For many people, reaching middle age comes with newfound aches and pains. I have no idea what they're talking about, as well as the realization you can no longer move like you once could. Well, now new research published in the journal Nature Aging is giving us new insight into all this. The authors believe people experience two periods of dramatic change, first in their mid-40s and then again around age 60. Joining us now for more is NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good morning. I think I can relate to some of this. Walk us through what changes people at these ages can expect. I say still achy from playing tennis yesterday. And what do they indicate?
That's okay, Joe. You're in good company because researchers found after looking at about 108 participants for anywhere from 2 to 6 years, they saw that indeed aging is not linear. It's kind of why, Joe, when at certain times in our lives, we're like, that hurts more than it should. Or I used to be able to do that workout and now I can't. And they essentially found, as you mentioned, ages 44 and 60 are when we experience a little bit of this more dramatic kind of effects of our aging. And they used a number of ways of looking at this. That's why this research is unique. They did what's called multi-omics by taking parts of analyzing your genome, your metabolism, your epigenetics, kind of putting these puzzle pieces together to come up with when those two kind of inflection points happen for your aging process.
So if you're in these age groups, just curious, what should you be looking out for? How do you manage these changes just through your lifestyle, your everyday life?
Yeah, and I think that's key. You have to keep living your everyday life, but it's knowing that these are critical time points. I also try to tell women that we have to look at the kind of time periods before these ages, because the 30s and the 50s for women, and also now we know for the 40s and their 60s, basically in every decade, we want to take stock in what we're doing and getting a lot of these multi-omics checked out. We want to make sure that we're seeing our doctor, getting our labs checked out, thinking about our nutrition and thinking about our exercise. But particularly if you're susceptible, a family history of chronic disease, or you have some other risk factors, those ages, Joe, can be pretty critical to thinking about screening for some of those diseases too. So they should serve as reminders. This should not defeat us. It should serve as a reminder that often in the 40s, we're often dealing with family, busy jobs. We need to deal with ourselves too.
That's an important reminder there. I mean, just big picture, how big of a step forward is what we're learning from this study? Does it help us better understand just some of the health issues people experience as they age?
It does. Listen, I see patients all the time where I try to explain that just going from, for example, 58 to 60, we might see an increase in kidney disease, heart disease. And as doctors, we've often wondered, well, why is that magic age? Why 60 when we start to see this prevalence? They may not be less healthy than when they were 58. This research is giving us a little bit of a peek into that. So I hope that we can start to see more personalized medicine recommendations. I'm hoping that more people listening to this message, if they are in that age group, in the 40s and in the 60s, that they make sure that they present and say, am I up to date on my screenings? Are there some other things I should be worried about, especially as we start to see age-related diseases for the memory, like dementia, Parkinson's, other movement disorders? This can be a time to modify your lifestyle to avoid some of those chronic conditions if possible.
Very cool. All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's stay on your health and talk about some big news from the Biden administration this morning, centered around its ongoing efforts to curb prescription drug costs for Americans on Medicare.
This morning, we're seeing results from the first round of price negotiations with the drug makers behind 10 medications commonly taken by seniors. Now, the White House says it's expecting billions of dollars in savings to be passed down to Americans over the next few years. This morning, President Biden released a statement reading in part that the relief is only possible because of the Inflation Reduction Act. For more, let's bring in NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. So first of all, just what kind of savings are some people seeing?
Yeah, this is a big deal. 38 to 79% savings in terms of what Medicare is paying for these very commonly used drugs for things like blood clots, in some cases arthritis, even some cancers. So this is a really big deal that covers 10 specific drugs. And this is going to lead to big savings for the government as well, because Medicare, by the way, is a $50 billion program. They project that this could save $6 billion. And for the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare users, they say this could save $1.5 billion. So again, this is a really big deal that could cover those hundreds of thousands of older Americans that use Medicare Part D to get these prescription drugs.
What are some of the specific drugs?
Yeah, well, there are 10 specific drugs that the administration negotiated these prices on, which, by the way, I want to point out is the first time Medicare has ever been able to negotiate these prices. But there are things like Xarelto, also things like Januvia. These, again, cover things like arthritis and blood clots. Diabetes is a big one. The most popular one of these 10 is actually Eliquis, which is a blood thinner medication. And they actually say that they were able to negotiate the price down by 56%, just to give you an example of the pricing here. So they took it down from somewhere over $500 to $231 for a 30-day supply. That could be big savings for the about 4 million Americans on Medicare Part D that use that specific drug, Eliquis.
Such a huge issue for so many people. So looking forward, what comes next? What do we expect ahead?
Yeah, well, as a reminder, these drug prices aren't going to take effect tomorrow. It's not going to take effect until 2026. And one other interesting wrinkle here is that the drug companies are suing the government about this. So could that choke up or maybe hold up the implementation of these prices? We'll have to see. But if all goes to plan, according to the Inflation Reduction Act, the Medicare program will also negotiate another round of drugs in the future based off of this success, I guess you might want to call it, for this first round of 10 drugs that we were able to negotiate the price down on.
Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Coming up, what was supposed to be a 10-day mission to space has now turned into a months-long ordeal for those 2 Starliner astronauts who are still aboard the International Space Station.
Now NASA is laying out a new tentative deadline to decide when to bring them back down to Earth. Our Tom Costello has the latest on that up next.
We are back with the latest on those 2 astronauts who've been on the International Space Station for more than 2 months. It was originally supposed to be a 10-day test flight for Boeing's spacecraft Starliner. But technical issues have forced the astronauts to stay longer than expected, and NASA is still trying to decide how and when to bring them home. NBC News senior international correspondent Tom Costello has more.
Yeah, good day. NASA says so far no decision has been made about how they're going to bring these 2 astronauts home. NASA makes the point there is robust internal discussion, so you can read that as debate inside the agency about whether it's safe to bring them home on the Starliner spaceship or whether they should come back on SpaceX. No matter what they do, there are risks and trade-offs. This is not an easy decision, NASA says. It's not black and white. There are a lot of factors that go into this. In the meantime, with so much here, NASA leadership says that the astronauts are being informed and updated, but they don't really get to vote on what they want to do. This is a decision made on the ground. And so those 2 astronauts are waiting, and they're in limbo. For astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, a new tentative deadline to decide how and when they might be returning back to Earth, with NASA now saying it hopes to decide before the end of the month the best way to get them home.
Let's go forward into Starliner.
The pair launched into space in June as the first crewed test of Boeing's Starliner. It was supposed to be a 10-day mission, but helium leaks and problems with Starliner's propulsion system have left the ship and its crew docked at the International Space Station for more than 2 months. The main issue, those problematic thrusters are needed for a safe re-entry.
Our big concern is having a successful deorbit burn, making sure that the prop system works just the way it needs to all the way through the deorbit burn.
Since docking with the station, NASA and Boeing engineers on the ground have been trying to troubleshoot the problems.
The delays show that they are doing their due diligence.
Former astronaut Mike Massimino says the risks associated with human space travel can lead to delays, and the decision-making process can get complicated.
The reason that it's so hard is because you're putting people inside of this. You want to make sure that you get the spaceship back, but you sure want to get that crew back.
Part of the new urgency, the space station has 2 docking ports for U.S. capsules, and both are being used now. One potential scenario would involve sending Starliner back without its crew and leaving 2 of 4 seats open on an upcoming SpaceX flight to the station. That mission already pushed back a month to September. So Williams and Wilmore could return with that team, but that would mean keeping them in space until February.
We are humans, and this is hard on crew members and their families, and we take that into account. But again, as professional astronauts, they're prepared for this, and they're doing great.
NASA makes the point again that they do have Starliner as an option for an emergency evacuation if the space station were facing an emergency. In other words, a meteor shower, they could evacuate on Starliner. But that's really only an emergency. They need to completely have this discussion and debate about whether they come back formally on Starliner or on SpaceX. In the meantime, they are not setting a record, by the way. Frank Rubio was stuck in space 371 days. So you would imagine Butch and Sonny are hoping they don't beat that record. So far, there's no indication they will. Back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you very much.
We're staying in the skies to kick off your money headlines. Flight attendants for Alaska Airlines are rejecting a new contract offer.
CNBC's Silvana Hanau has that and other money headlines. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Good morning to you. Yes, so flight attendants at Alaska Airlines have rejected a proposed 3-year contract after reaching a tentative agreement in June. The union says there's more work to do. Now, the 2 sides will have to return to the table to resume negotiations. The rejection comes as Alaska's merger with Hawaiian Airlines is still pending with regulators. Apple is reportedly pushing ahead with plans for an iPad-like tabletop device. Bloomberg says you may be able to use it to manage your smart home products, home security, and for video calls. It's set to have a thin robotic arm that moves around a large display screen and may be powered by Siri and Apple's new AI tools. The device could be launched as soon as 2026. Oh boy, and Chapel Mania keeps growing. Chapel Roan's album, The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, is challenging Taylor Swift's Tortured Poets department for the top spot on the Billboard 200. The pop sensation currently has 7 songs scaling the charts, including Hot to Go. Roan's debut album is now at number 3, just behind Swift and Vultures 2 by Kanye West and Ty Dolla $ign, guys.
That's
now,
what
do
I've
you guys
been
know the
listening
Hot to Go
To
dance?
Chapel Roan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
Oh, love.
I love her. Do you know? Do you guys know the dance? Do you guys know the dance?
Well, I started teaching her parent. Do you?
Yeah.
Yes, I love this song.
Okay, so
The
let's
stage
take
is
Silvana
yours.
full and let's go.
Guys, you ready? You ready? All right,
Yes.
here we go. HOTTOGO. Do you guys get? Come on.
It's the new YMCA.
Silvana, I
It's
love
so
you.
good.
God,
It's so good.
Your
It's
cute
so
little
good.
graphic yesterday, this today. What will we get tomorrow?
All right, we'll see what tomorrow brings.
Thank you, Savannah. Appreciate it.
All right, bye, guys.
An Army father serving overseas gave his 2 young daughters the surprise of a lifetime. NBC's Morgan Chesky has their heartwarming story.
This was the sound
as the 1st Battalion of the Arizona National Guard's 158th Infantry Regiment finally returned home. Families gathering to greet loved ones in uniform they haven't seen in almost a year. But for Sergeant Christopher Fulton, returning home from his 3rd deployment.
1 in Iraq, 2 to the Middle East, elsewhere.
The 2 people he can't wait to see are not in this crowd.
I just want to see my babies. I'm so excited to see them. I'm excited to see their face, their smiles, and get those hugs from them and miss those hugs.
Daughters Layla and Lana already at school in Gilbert, Arizona. Mom Jordan describing the challenges their families faced.
It's hard, you know, that drive away, you know, the drop off. It is challenging, but I just try to remind them that, like, what their dad is doing is important.
But with a little help from the school.
I'm so excited to see their little faces and see how much they've grown.
This Army dad hiding backstage as the students filed in for an assembly.
They're gonna love this. They're gonna remember this for the rest of their lives. It's gonna be a core memory and something that they have.
The moment that curtain opened, absolutely unforgettable. Dad Christopher doing his best to soak up every second.
It's actually real now. There's no more video chats. I can actually touch them and see them. So I'm so excited right now. Oh, they mean the world to me. Like the best gift I ever had.
It's actually real now. I like that. Right? Thanks to Morgan Chesky for sharing that sweet story.
Coming up, have you been seeing all those posts on social media where people talk about being very demure, very mindful?
Well, if you have and have no clue what it's all about, we've got a full explanation of the latest viral phrase coming up next.
We are back with some Hollywood news. Superstar Demi Lovato will be making her directorial debut with a new documentary. It's called Child Star. It's going to feature JoJo Siwa, Drew Barrymore, and many other familiar faces talking about their experiences as child actors and how it has impacted their careers and their current lives. Lovato told The Hollywood Reporter that the main goal of the documentary is for people to understand what young children go through in the industry and how society can make our environment safer for young talents. Child Star is set to be released on Hulu next month. She's been teasing this project for quite a while. I think it's super interesting.
It's an issue that has been touched on in various different ways,
right.
I mean, for a long time, but especially over the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to hear their perspective.
And super interesting to have it being led by a child star himself. You know what I mean? Having that lens on it.
All right, from goblin mode to OK Boomer and even Oxford's 2023 Word of the Year, Riz, TikTok continues to build a language lexicon that can be hard to keep up with. Just in the last couple of months, we were introduced to hashtag Brat Summer.
That's right. Well, now there's a new season taking shape. It's being called Demure Fall from some videos that are going super viral on TikTok. Watch this.
See how I come to work? Very demure. I do my makeup. I lay my wig. I do a little braid. I flat iron my hair. I do chi-chis out. I do viral vanilla. Very demure, very mindful. Let's not forget to be demure divas.
NBC News youth and internet culture reporter Colin Rosenblatt is back with us with more on this. Colin, good morning. Okay, break this down for us. What does it mean to be very demure, very mindful, very cutesy? How did this all get started?
Well, Savannah, Joe, look at me. I'm being very mindful. I'm being very demure as I do this reporting. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek term that has taken over TikTok, where it's either you really are being kind of demure, you're being very well put together, as Jules LeBron, that creator, mentioned. And in other cases, people are using it to describe instances where they are extremely not demure. For example, blocking your ex and then calling him to have a mental breakdown. So it's been used in myriad ways, but it was started by Jules LeBron. She is a content creator. She originally was doing more of like get ready with me, product reviews, and then she started to make videos earlier this month using that term demure, then using very mindful, very cutesy, and it quickly caught on. And that is just, you know, as you mentioned, whether it's goblin mode or Riz, these very accessible terms that we can all use and apply and joke with and kind of use as a tongue-in-cheek term. that is how this thing caught on, and it has absolutely exploded from major accounts to celebrities to brands, all using this terminology.
So it means you got dressed for work?
You look very demure, very cutesy, Joe. Very mindful.
Demure for many, many years now. I mean, you say it's taken off. I mean, some videos have racked up tens of millions of views. So why is this catching on?
Yeah, I think, when we think about the terminology on TikTok that really seems to catch on, I think relatability is a big component here. I think when I am, for instance, in goblin mode and I have my hair up and no makeup on and I'm wearing a big t-shirt and doing my work, I can fully relate to being in goblin mode, but I can also relate to being cutesy and demure and very mindful about how I look. So I think these applicabilities are how these terminologies really seem to take off on platforms like TikTok, and then they grow and expand through other social media platforms, whether that be X or Instagram or Snapchat or any of these other platforms.
Joe, do you ever go goblin mode?
No. I mean, like maybe on a weekend, but not out of the house. You don't leave the house.
Oh, you so leave the house. It's like Saturday, midday. Oh, I do. Walking my dog. Oh, I love a goblin mode. Galen, what do you think this says that social media, it kind of sparks this whole new language, and then it becomes something where we say goblin mode, we say Riz, and we know what each other's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of fascinated by the way that social media, TikTok in particular, has shaped language. I mean, we think about Gen Alpha and things like the Rizzler or Gyat or Sigma and all these things that if you weren't on social media a lot of the time, it may sound completely foreign to you. You may have no clue what someone is saying. And I think continue, as you saw last year, Riz was the word of the year. We're going to continue to see social media terms bleed into real life.
Callan, thank you for joining us. It's a good one. You do look very demure, very cutesy. We appreciate it.
So much Riz. Charisma, right?
Yes.
That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.